And in the Kashmiri Pandit case, not a single Muslims might have been killed by Kashmiri Pandits, but in the Godhra riots case, of course, more Muslims died, but of course, many Hindus died also. Still the reports are sort of like 15 times more or so, 15-16 times more. This is again at variance with the experience in the West. UK, France, Belgium, US, in no country it is not there, the majority cannot have their institution. So, in sum I can say the Indian constitution is sort of biased against the Hindus, but if you look at the Indian constitution, it is actually violating that. Indian constitution has different civil laws for different religions. So, Indian constitution is violating equality, that was promised by Hindutva Hindu Mahasabha. There is a report again from NCAER that actually tells that Hindus and Muslims, the nominal difference in income is very less, not very high, only 3,000, I mean I have shown the statistics here. But if you look at the other minorities like Sikhs and Christians, they are having a really higher income than either of them. That is it. So, basically it is nothing to do with majority or minority. Thank you sangamtalks for inviting me for this book talk. I sincerely appreciate it. I have published my book, The Majoritarian Myth, How Unscientific Social Theories Create Disharmony, last year 2024, and I have gave a lot of talks different places in India, Ahmedabad, Pondicherry Lit Fest, Indian Institute of World Culture and other places. So, today I will try to talk about this book, how it is a sort of an idea. In a way it is an idea that I wanted to talk about, but it is in a way it is to create a dialogue between the left and the right. So, in a social media in different issues, what happens, the so called right wingers, they point out to the asymmetry of the reaction from the left on different issues, and they call it hypocrisy or bigotedness of the left. But the left, they actually answer it back that it is not a bigotedness, it is we have a framework, you do not have a framework, and and after this the dialogue typically breaks down. The right keeps on, may not understand the framework or the sanctity of it that well. So, they sort of think it is bigotedness, polished bigotedness, and the left thinks it is dumbness, and after that there is no dialogue. So, that lack of dialogue is sort of is of a concern for social harmony. It leads to very tremendous amount social disharmony, which often people call it culture wars or cancel culture, whatever you call it. So, I try to give a path away from it. So, there are two elements. First of all, a framework is actually necessary to understand things. When we study physics or chemistry, we always have a framework, it helps us understand, and there is no doubt about it. And so, this part I take from the left. But at the same time, just because you have a framework does not mean that you have the monopoly over the truth. Truth is more dependent on the data, the reality, and the framework has to match with the reality. Otherwise, it is not a worthy framework. So, I give an example. For example, in the Aristotelian universe, there was a framework. If you drop two objects, a lighter and a higher one from the top, the lighter objects will sort of come down slowly, and the heavier objects will drop much faster, I mean proportionately faster. But this framework, this was a framework. But the point was, this was not a right framework, although it persisted with us for many centuries, the human beings for many centuries. Eventually, Galileo ended the framework by doing a reality test by dropping two balls from the top of the Tower of Pisa. So, this is exactly what I am trying to do. I am trying to look at the framework which the left call majoritarian, the theory of majoritarianism, or they call it counter majoritarianism, but it is often referred as majoritarianism. I will actually look at the theory and I will test it from the data. This is the entire idea of my book. So, the idea myth in my book is actually a term that was not casually written. It was a word, academic discourse it is used. It is used by a famous thinker called of futurology, His name is Inayatullah, Sohail Inayatullah. So, basically the idea of the myth is what is the deepest thinking, the deepest layered, in a layered thinking. If you think the different thinkings are different layers, what is the deepest layer of thinking? That is called the myth. That myth actually gives rise to different social issues that we look at times. So, one of the issues of this majoritarianism is basically there is a myth that the majority community persecutes the minority community. So, majorities are sort of always attackers in different subtle amounts in the social interactions, and the minorities are sufferers. This is the myth. So, to counter the myth, so because this myth is there in the many social sciences, in the academia, so what is the sort of remedy of this attack by the majority? They think in the media and everywhere the attacks by on the majority has to be sort of toned down in the media, and the attacks on the minorities has to be hyped up. So, that society act asymmetrically to counter this phenomenon. So, this is the entire idea of majoritarianism, and this is there in so many different issues that I can actually talk about many hours on the effects of majoritarianism, but I leave it to you as an exercise to find out where do you find it in media, academia, in law and other places. I will just talk about one particular example. So, here is the example. Two persons died like 6 years ago. One is Hafiz Junaid. He was supposed to be sort of there is a dispute of seat in the train in Haryana, I think, and then he was sort of murdered very unfortunately, but because it is a minority who is dying and the majority, the typical sense of the term, the Muslims are considered minority and Hindus are considered majority. So, this is why a minority is being attacked by the majority. That is how they sort of thought about it. Attacks happen for different reasons, not for just for identity, for many other reasons, but I am not going to there. So, if you look at the BBC headlines, they actually wrote Muslims, it is not only one Muslim, many Muslims are in Indian train assaulted because they ate beef. So, this is the giving rise, and this is sort of not consistent with the judicial finding. The honorable judge, he said the initial altercation is all about seats, nothing to do with any other. On the other hand, if you look at the other guy, Umesh Kolhe, he was murdered it in Maharashtra, and this person he was murdered explicitly probably from some religious issues, because he supported a controversial statement by Nupur Sharma, and but in that case there is no evidence of any other motive like any stealing, robbery, dacoity, because all the belongings he had remained with him, but it is sort of toned down in a way, it is not published so much. I mean, we all know the name of Hafiz Junaid, and much fewer people may know the name of Umesh Kolhe. The same story is true for Akhlaq of Dadri. This happened in 2015 when this person was unfortunately murdered because there were some issues concerning cow slaughter. When people attributed him that he slaughtered a cow and all. And then Prashant Pujari of Karnataka, he was actually an activist to save the cows. He was killed, and now I have shown you, I have used a database called Global News Stream, and you can see that 1900, more than 1900 results are there on the murder of the first person, while there are very few on the only 140 on the murder of the second person. So, this asymmetry is because this is an actually not a coincidental or sort of being carved out. It is not that, it is sort of intentional, because people who are doing it, they are done it with the best of the intentions. They want to protect the minority, they want to do social harmony, that is why they are doing it. They are not doing it out of any malice. This is the first thing we have to understand. But are they correct? Are they scientific? That is the entire exercise is all about. Okay. So, I have seen many other issues we can talk about. We have talked about the the Kashmiri Pandits, the biggest internal migration that happened in independent India out of Kashmir Valley in 1990. But the number of reports I have found is only less than 2000. On the other hand, the post Godhra riots, And there is a, in the Kashmiri Pandit case, not a single Muslims might have been killed by Kashmiri Pandits, but in the Godhra riots case, of course more Muslims died, but of course many Hindus died also. Still the reports are sort of like 15 times more or so, 15-16 times more. This actually is sort of the idea of the same issue. Now, I have done a much more rigorous survey, this time from the global media for 3 years, 2020, 21, 22, and I have looked into all the reports. And so this database, they keeps the track of the all major newspapers, but more than that they keeps track of the all the academics, major academic thesis, major judicial things. So, all the important documents that is sort of thought as the mainstream discourse, and there I have found the Hindus of India. So, I looked into the number of mentions of these terms, and whenever there is a mention, I check whether that report actually associates the concept of majority to a particular community. So, sometimes these are used in an abstract sense, there I do not know what is the connotation of it, I mean we may not know, but where it is distinctly associated. Suppose the article says majoritarianism is a bad thing and then talks about Hindus of India as a majority, then we know it is sort of blaming indirectly the community for being sort of discriminatory to the minorities, or more than discriminatory, maybe aggressor to the minorities. So, I looked into the database, 80% of the time it is the Hindus of India. I mind you, this is the global media, not Indian media. In a global, Indians are like 15% of the global population, Hindus are even less. Still, we Hindus of India are blamed for 80% of the time for different aggression. And the next in the list is Buddhists of Sri Lanka, again 7.8% of the time, again disproportionately more. There is also some other entities like Hindi speakers of India and Hindus and Buddhists of South Asia. Many Americans, they can't distinguish these two terms between Hindi and Hindu. They sort of think that Hindus speak Hindi and all. So, keeping all these biases in mind, the actual implication might be much more than 80%. In we can say safely in the South Asia, the Hindus and Buddhists are blamed for 90% of the time. That is an atrocious number, I think. So, the point I am trying to say that I am criticizing a theory, but this is not an academic exercise. This is a very big impact on the discourses that go on typically in the media. One possibility is that, of course, the Indian constitution is actually biased for the Hindus, and that is why the media is justifiably doing it. But actually we find it is the other way around. In article 25 of the Indian constitution, it actually gives the propagation of religion as a right, and but interestingly this clause propagation was not there. Initially it was only about practice and profession, but propagation was sort of inserted at the insistence of Indian Christians, most notably a learned Bengali Christian Harendra Kumar Mukherjee. So, the point I am trying to say that Christianity is an evangelical religion. Their idea is to sort of make people part of Christianity, and this is how they think is sort of right. But in the Indian tradition, that was completely missing. There is no concept of sort of conversion of other person. The Indian tradition talks about developing inner virtues through different practices. Whether you by name talk yourself as Hindu or Buddhist is completely irrelevant, and this is what Gandhiji said many times. So, from that point of view, article 25 is sort of an intrusion on the Indian traditions itself, not only on the Hindus, but Indian traditions. But of course, it is against the Hindus, because Hindus has no such things as conversion. Now, if you look at this anomaly is not only true for India, it is true for many other countries. For example, the Orthodox Christians, they are not proselytizing by nature, and they feel threatened by the Protestant denominations' aggression in evangelization, and this conflict is found in East Europe, many countries. So, in Greek constitution, they actually allow persons to profess their own religion and practice, but not to propagate. So, this is basically to save the Greek Orthodox Church from the Protestant aggression. So, the idea is I am trying to say that essentially this is not only my slant, It is an accepted problem in another country, European country, Greek country, because they have their civilizational issues. Right. Similarly, I can show in article 28 which sort of prohibits Hindu texts being taught in the education system, but with the minorities they could have their institution and teach their own texts, there is no problem with that. And article 30 prohibits to make Hindu schools. So, Hindus cannot sort of make an educational institution because they are the majority, the minorities could have theirs. Now, this is again at variance with the experience in the West. UK, France, Belgium, US, in no country it is not there, the majority cannot have their institution. So, in sum I can say the Indian constitution is sort of biased against the Hindus, even a tiny bit or whatever the extent could be debated, but definitely it is slanted against the Hindus, there is no doubt about it. We can talk on many issues on judiciary, I will just keep it in a minute, but essentially if you look at Sabrimala judgment, the justice is applicable to only Hindus. Why? Because it talks about the essential practices of the religion. Now, for the religions that are driven by a fundamental book like the Bible, there is no, people know what is essential because it is codified in the book. But for Hindus the practices do not come from any book, it comes from a tradition. We do things because it is sort of accepted and these traditions change slowly, sometimes may not change if this is not relevant, but the idea is it is not coming from the book. And then it is very difficult for anyone to say whether it is an essential feature of the religion or not. And taking into that leeway into account, the judiciary considered the Sabrimala is not essential and it is a secular domain and they impose their verdicts. But this would have been, this is sort of not possible for a book driven religion. Of course, we have a Justice Chandrachud was a Chief Justice and he also believes the majoritarianism is a serious threat. So, I am just trying to say that I am not blaming anyone, everyone who is believing in majoritarianism or this theory, they are doing it to the best of the intentions, but they do believe it in. And that is what my point is, it is not an academic exercise, it is a real thing that has a big impact on the real life. Similarly, there is a historian Ramchandra Guha who said that naming any road in New Delhi by the name of Shivaji is an act of majoritarianism. This is what he wrote. Because why? Because sort of he understood that because Delhi is a central place, Shivaji is sort of thought as a Hindu icon. Again this is a big thing from the majoritarianism theory, because firstly Shivaji is not really a Maratha icon, it is an all India icon. One Bengali poet Rabindranath Tagore, he actually wrote a very laudatory poem towards Shivaji celebrating his legacy. So, this is being celebrated all over India in some sense of the term, and still he is being considered just a minor Hindu lord or something, because Ramchandra Guha with the right intentions believe in the theory of majoritarianism. Similarly, there is many issues like government control of Hindu temples, the communal violence bill that will always blame the majority for any violence. They will not believe, they will always say that majority are at fault, whoever the real fault it is. This is really big because laws tend to be sort of more similar. Similarly, there is a statement by then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh which is also to the similar effect. I have 5 parts in my book. This is the first part. In that part I was discussing about the effect of majoritarianism on the discourses, on the understanding of the universe. In the second part I talk about the origin of the term, how this came to be the thinking. Third part I will posit a new theory, usual books. So, I have read all the books which are written for majoritarianism, they stop at that, they just discuss their idea and stop. But because I am countering, I will not stop there, because I am countering a mainstream theory, I can't stop there. I will test their theory against my theory using data and using all the scientific rigor that could be summoned. And after that, fourth part we will test it. And fifth chapter I will talk about what are the way for social harmony if you do not believe in majoritarianism. That is the sort of the plan. So, let us talk about the how the term came to be, and I will be sort of brief in this. History is sort of many people do not like to go too much into history. So, I will just keep it in mind. Essentially, this is not there is no democracy. the majority minority is not a very important concept, because nothing happens because of number, the other things are more important. So, this term of course inevitably came in the new times. However, this is however not a very new term in some sense. Actually, this was talked about by Plato. Plato talked about the idea of the majority, and he said that majority could be very wrong, but this majority he did not talk about a majority that are known by numbers or identity. He talked about a majority that are sort of based on lack of domain knowledge. So, Plato said, suppose there is a problem in a ship, or let us say in the current times in an aeroplane, the majority of the passengers, they have no understanding of the flight, aviation or other details. Now, if there is a problem in the plane, would you talk to the average, majority of the passengers, or would you talk to the very few people who know aviation, the pilots? The answer is very simple. You cannot really talk to the majority, you have to talk to the minority who have domain knowledge. But this is sort of been understood in the time of 19th century, when a French diplomat, Alexis de Tocqueville, he toured America, and he said that America suffers from tyranny of the majority. Why tyranny of the majority? The tyranny of the majority is because America, there is no role of the elite. Everything is done by the majority voting, and he thinks this actually is not good, because many times the elite who are actually running the administration, they have a domain expertise, that domain knowledge is lost, and this is what he talked about. And he prescribed some idea, and I mind you, that time in the European governance, there is of course a House of Commons, the lower house, and there is to be of course an upper house, which is House of Lords in Britain and other places, other names, but essentially that used to be comprised of the elite who had experience in the governance. That, so it was a sort of compromise. In America there is no such compromise. Again we encountered this term in the John Stuart Mill's, but Stuart Mill, what he suggested, he said that some social principles must be adhered to, and this is the beginning of the idea of majoritarianism in some sense. However, Stuart Mill's idea was very different. He said, who is the smallest minority? And it is of course the individual. I am the minority of size 1. So, my rights have to be very sacrosanct. So, personal liberty has to be the most important thing. Now, if you come now, the ideas change, phases, times, and this is what happened. Now, if you look at the liberals who talk about majoritarianism, the liberals are sort of left liberals, not the classical liberals of John Locke or John Stuart Mill. They do not believe in individual rights to be that sacrosanct, they believe in sort of the group rights to be much more sacrosanct. So, this is really at variance with John Stuart Mill. Now, the next move to majoritarianism happens under the thinkers, Marxist thinkers like Gramsci and Frankfurt School. So, what happened when Marx talked about his framework, the classes are known only by economic prosperity or economic strength or ownership of the production. This used to be called bourgeoisie and proletariat. Now, these people, they extended Marxian framework to cultural domain. So, basically they said there is a class with a hegemony, and this hegemony is the oppressor, and the class without hegemony is the oppressed. That is the Gramscian framework or Frankfurt School framework. Now, what happened? It is interpreted, the majority has the hegemony, so they are the oppressor, and the minority may not have hegemony, they are the oppressed. And this is how majoritarianism found its footing in the theories. And what happened that this is a sort of new topic altogether, but essentially the point is all these thinkings were in Germany and by the socialists, some of them were Jews. And then what happened when the Hitler started his policies, his ruthless policies of extermination of all thoughts, these people they have to leave Germany sometime point in time, and they landed up in eventually in America, and there they actually started the what you know so called the liberal discourse, which are all starting from celebrating the Gramscian legacy, and this is how this entire thing took over the academy. Now, what I will do, I will talk about an alternative idea. Now, of course, this Gramscian theory has two sort of assumptions inbuilt. One is symmetry of all the cultures. If the cultures are all symmetric, of course, you can talk about hegemony and all, but are they really all symmetric? And secondly, of course, there is even more major idea, that is the society marked by conflict, or is it also marked by harmony and collaboration? So, I am not actually talking about the second idea, which is even bigger. I am sort of leaving it aside. I am talking about the first idea, that are the cultures symmetric. Now, when we talk about the two parties at conflict, we always say, well, go back to the history, this guy will blame for this act, this guy will back for even bigger past act, this guy will blame for that act. So, there is no never ending cycle, and there is nothing, no truth will come out of it. But it is not so for many situations. For example, when the Europeans first landed in the New World, the Americas, the Americans were quite respectful of the Europeans. They were sort of greeted them with the most amount of courtesy and all. But the Europeans, they are completely ruthless, dehumanizing these people. Why? Because these Europeans, they have a certain dogma in their mind, which tells them to aggressively colonize, to aggressively do imperialism, and they feel it is ethical to do colonialism, because these people are not sort of Christians, they do not have any good values, that is why they have to be taught values, and that is why it is good to be ruthless to them, to teach them values. White man's burden is another name about it. So, I call this the linear theory of social evolution. So, when an imperialism happens, it never happens because one person thinks about it. It always happens because a collective entity or society thinks good about it, and this is the all it about. So, this idea is not exactly my idea, it is a sociological term, this linear theory of social evolution or linear theory of social change, some people call it. This is abbreviated as LTSE. Although it is a sociological idea, typical sociologists just define it, but they do not associate it with intolerance or bigotry, which I am actually doing. So, here is a definition of LTSE. So, it has a linear plan. So, a dogma is increasing, increasing, increasing. It is never can decrease, it never can come down, right. And Yuval Noah Harari has observed it, that Christianity is such a dogma. Before Christianity, the historians, they used to believe in a cyclical universe. Herodotus, Greek historian, Chinese historians, they used to believe that there is a cyclical, nothing is permanently rising or falling. But Christianity brings a worldview that says something will permanently go on, permanently go down, nothing is sort of cyclical. So, this is a linear theory, Christianity. Second part of characteristic is what is called otherization. Otherization is basically, it is not an academic theory that you just think it will go on. Suppose someone is not accepting your theory, then you make him feel less, you will discriminate against him actively, and you will feel them, you will feel yourself superior and them inferior in your values. That is how this thing sort of works. I have a lot of academic literature, like it is called social identity theory and all. I have given some example, those who are interested, they actually are quite matched with my framework quite well. So, here is the categorization. The LTSEs are political Christianity, political Islam, communism, Nazism, racism, cultural Marxism, I might say, or it is a liberalism as the adherents call about. I will give you an example. You might be sort of think it is castigation against them. No, it is not any castigation, it is a theory, and they really believe in the theory in the all the good term. So, I will give you a very prominent example. We know a very big massacre that happened in India is Jallianwala Bagh massacre. When the British General Dyer, he sort of shot bullets on armed people and killed hundreds of them, right. You must be thinking that everybody was so upset about him. No, not at all. That time the British ladies of America, British ladies in India, they were supporting Dyer. They are saying Dyer is the last person who could save us. Why are they saying this? Were those British women heartless? Not at all. They had a linear theory. They were thinking that we have to go preach what they think is Protestant Christian values or British values, and this has to give the entire world. So, if someone it has to be thrust by force, that is okay. in the interest of their good intention or having people good values. That is what they are thinking. They are not at all heartless. In many social events you will feel the same persons quite sort of empathetic to you, quite sort of taking care of you good way and all, but that is what they believed in. Because they believed in, they supported Dyer, and this is the idea of the linear theory. It makes everybody sort of go towards you because it believes doing something for good. Similar is the story of political Islam or communism. Communism talks about equality or basically dictatorship of the proletariat, but they want to thrust it upon others, even though other people may not want it, but they sort of think that they are suffering from some bourgeois cultural weakness or sickness, and that is why it has to be removed by force. So, that is all about. I have given in my book all these dogmas from their text that they actually support the linear theory and they actually support otherization. I have given in my book all the snaps from them. It is not directly I am saying it, it is they are themselves saying it. Same is true about Nazism. Nazism thought that a new racial hierarchy has to be done, and that has to be sort of where the Germans at top, Aryans at top and Jews at the end, and that is what they believe. And this is actually acknowledged by Yuval Noah Harari also. And then of course, Nazism is just one type of racism. The typical racism wants all the other races to be eliminated. Similarly, the liberalism, they also want other sort of a ruthless pursuit of equality that defies common man's experience. It is not based on what people see or experience, it is a theory and they want to ruthlessly impose it. If someone oppose it, they want to otherize the people through cancel culture. So, I am not saying the violence are all equal. The Dyer shot fires many bullets and communists may have kept people to in Siberian prisons and all for sort of defying them. But that is not what liberalism do. They probably just otherize and cancel or take someone's job away, that sort of a thing. But the amount of violence may not be exactly same. It depends on culture, time, context, society, but there is always violence. That is what I call otherization. Now, is it my own idiosyncratic theory? Not really. If you look Yuval Noah Harari, his famous book The Sapiens, he actually said that Nazism, communism, liberalism are just religions like Christianity or Islam. No deep problem there. Then Tom Holland, a Christian thinker, Hinduism is not a religion at all. They say the original religion is Christianity. So, that is what they also say. So, what I am saying is not sort of a very new statement, but only I am framing it in my linear theory framework. And if you look at the other things like nationalism, Western nationalisms are not necessarily LTSEs. If you look at the British nationalism, for example, it started as a Christian country, Anglican church and all, but now few days ago Rishi Sunak, a practicing Hindu, was the head of the Conservative party, the Christian party, and he was also the premier of Great Britain. This is impossible if they really believe in if they really believe in the country being run by a political Christianity. So, it is a nationalism, geographic nationalism. We may have its good and virtues and vices, but it is not a linear theory. It changes different times, different things. Hinduism is again similarly, it is not a religion, it does not have any theory. It talks about everything as cycles. The 4 yugas are cycles, the different varnas, they actually go up and go down, this is sort of cycle. They also talks about Hinduism, whatever Hinduism talks about is a cycle. Hindutva is a more nuanced and all, but I will actually discuss a little bit on it, but why it is not a linear theory. Someone may talk about casteism and all. Suppose someone is talking about caste and they are saying that one caste will sort of eliminate all the other caste and be the only caste, then of course that is a linear theory. But suppose someone is saying there are many castes and my caste is the best of all. For that reason only you cannot call it a linear theory, because he is not talking about any sort of a linear way of growth. He is only saying that mine is the best. Everybody says mine is the best. For that is not a problem. But the moment he start doing the making others as victims, that is a problem. So, there is a fine nuance involved, but there is a nuance. Now, many people when they talk about nationalism, they give the example of Adolf Hitler and say he was a bad person and nationalisms tend to be sort of intolerant. But actually Nazism is not at all a stereotypical nationalism. Hitler is sort of could not imagine himself the leader of China, India, Russia, this kind of very diverse state. He could imagine himself only as the leader of a very sort of one racial state, that is sort of German, where some Jews are there. But this kind of diverse, so this is not a really nationalism the way people think in China, India or Russia. So, this is a very different kind of nationalism. And secondly, Hitler himself, he thought himself as a socialist, and I am sort of quoting from the Mein Kampf here, where he is sort of saying that the red symbol of his flag, it is sort of reminiscent of the socialist values of the movement. So, again it is coming from a communism sort of values. And then again here there is a very famous thinker who actually Yoram Hazony, who is actually the organizer of the conservative conference in Washington, I think 2024. He has a very award winning book, The Virtue of Nationalism, and there he discussed which are the imperialisms, and he discussed that Christianity, communism, Nazism, Islam and liberalism as imperialism. So, it is sort of matching with my framework, and he does not consider any other thing as imperialisms. So, this is the idea of LTSE, it is matching with mine, although his framework is different, but we are coming to the same conclusion, which is important. It may here also be added that Hinduism is not sort of only it is a generic name. Any religions, any sort of cultural understanding that do not have a theory, like the pagans of Africa, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Chinese religions, they all Shintoism, they all could be thought as sort of similar idea without any LTSEs. I will discuss a little bit on Hindutva, why it is not an LTSE. Now, Chandranath Hindutva started by a writing of a person, Chandranath Basu. He wrote a book Hindutva, and then basically there he described it, and that same tradition followed. Rabindranath Tagore wrote has an essay on Hindutva, and Tagore actually wrote that Hindutva is the cultural essential. I am paraphrasing, but you can see the exact quote there. But essentially what he said, that Hinduism is the cultural understanding that we have to be very selfless. We do not have to be think about an anthropocentric world when human beings are the center of attention. We want to see an universe where human beings just a small part of it, and we have to, for that we need to practice selflessness in all actions. That is what is called Hindutva. If you look at the Hindutva of Savarkar, who wrote again another book, Hindutva, 3 decades later, he is actually proposing a linear theory. Savarkar's book do not have any sort of grudge against the Muslims, as I have quoted. He is actually saying the Mohammedans, they are actually as patriotic and noble minded here also as the Hindus. He also mentioned about it, I have given the quote. And then in the manifesto of the Hindu Mahasabha, the party following Hindutva of Savarkar, it is written that everybody will have equality, men and women and all religions. That is what is being done. I mean all people, all persons will have equality. He did not mention religions, but essentially the idea is all religions will have no role in the governance. It will be a sort of governance based on your actions, not based on your faith. Then Indian, but if you look at the Indian constitution, it is actually violating that. Indian constitution has different civil laws for different religions. So, Indian constitution is violating equality, that was promised by Hindutva of Hindu Mahasabha. So, in some sense we cannot call it a linear theory. Now, let us look at the Hindutva of BJP RSS. Is it an LTSE? Now, in academia many people call it so. They call it they equate it to Nazism, like Christopher Jeffrey Lott and other people. And there are also some rebuttals have been given by very academic scholarly books of Kunda Des or Ravinder Nilakandan. Now, I do not want to go into too much into this sort of debate, it becomes a lot of theological. Let us look at the outcome. Outcome wise, does Hindutva is practicing the bigotry or anything like that. Now, what are the allegations? So, I am quoting here from Asutosh Basne, a critic of Hindutva. He is saying that Ajodhya Ram temple is a problem. He is essentially saying the common civil code is a problem. He is saying the abolition of special status is a problem, Jammu and Kashmir is a problem. But if you look at the reality, K.K. Muhammad, he has actually as archaeologist, a prominent archaeologist, Muslim by faith, he has given testimony on Ajodhya about the Ram Mandir, and in any case it has happened because of court verdict, so and which is governed by Indian constitution. So, I do not see the merit of the Hindutva being discriminatory. Secondly, there is a common civil code. Again, this is actually given in the Indian constitution itself, that this has to come. So, we cannot really call it a lack of it is a LTSE or sort of discrimination. The idea of the special status itself was a sort of temporary. So, again that is cannot be considered as a problem. So, what I am trying to say that the academia, it is possible that they are actually carried out by their liberal understanding, and that is why, because liberal ideas has imperialism, they have to destroy any nationalism, and that is why they have to be aggressive towards Hindutva. So, the accusations of Hindutva are not coming from the facts, it is coming from their own dogmas, that is what I am trying to say. Now, Citizenship Amendment Act, it has kept the Muslims outside the purview of that act. Is that a linear theory? Again, you have to look all things from the historical perspective. Let us look at the Citizenship Amendment Act. This has actually kept Muslims outside the purview. Is it a linear theory to otherize the Muslims? Now, everything you have to see from the perspective of history, and this Citizenship Amendment Act has a historical reasons, as all these states from where refugees are coming, they are part of the same cultural milieu, and eventually this was claimed by as Muslim countries, and there was a sufficient evidence of discrimination, and this is why this is what the argument of the government is. This is why they have been kept outside this act. Otherwise, the idea of the refugee does not arise also, that is the idea, because the refugees has to come from religious reasons. Now, what has happened that in America, United States, which is considered the sort of the best constitution manifesting equality, there itself we find some act like Lautenberg Amendment or Attendant Specter Amendment, where actually different religious groups based on their history are given special status. So, the idea that CA is discriminatory and it is a otherization is does not actually have any footing. I also look into the data. If you look at the number of riots that happened 6 years before Narendra Modi's coming to power, 6 years after, you can see there is a decrease in number of cases of riots. So, really if you look at compared to the Nazis, Hitler came to power in 1933, within months, 4 months, all the Jewish scientists are out, even the Nobel laureate Jewish scientists, they are at a problem, they are facing problem. So, of course, I do not know actually anyone, there is many people actually talked about that growing intolerance and leaving India, but I do not know anyone who really left India, a single person after that time. So, the comparison is completely unfounded, and I think the academicians which are still holding on the theory that Hindutva is Nazism, they should apologize to an extent, because their understanding was wrong. I think they should accept their ignorance, then we can take them seriously. And then of course, there is an increase in poor minority scholarships under BJP and other things. Very interestingly, I will talk about a fine person, Karl Popper, who is considered the best philosopher of science in the 20th century. He actually talks about something called the paradox of tolerance. So, the idea is, he says that unlimited tolerance will lead to disappearance of tolerance, because the intolerant will be anointed with the too much tolerance, and they will eventually remove tolerance from society. So, I mind you one thing, Karl Popper, he is not talking about majority minority, rather he is talking about different cultures, some cultures which are tolerant, some cultures we may not be tolerant. So, here I put just a snapshot of the books. I have critiqued all these books in my ideas of these books, and even directly some of the quotes of the book in my book have shown why they are sort of wrong. But I mind you one thing, they have not done any testing of hypothesis that I am going to do now. This is my book's strength. Now, I do scientific examination of two hypotheses. One is called the majoritarian hypothesis, one is called the LTSE hypothesis. The majoritarian hypothesis says the majority is guilty, they are sort of the intolerant. The LTSE hypothesis says it is not majority or minority. The community who are having linear theory of social evolution, LTSEs, they are actually intolerant. Let us see which is sort of true from the data. So, what I have done, I looked into the genocides. So, there are 1500 genocides by there is a committee, sort of a body that discusses genocides. They run. I do not want to discuss 1500 genocides. it is impossible. I looked into the top 10 genocides that are discussed in the Western society, not Indian society, not Australia, the Westerns. And I actually found out that in case of almost all of them, majority of the population were not involved in violence. In case of the Rwandan genocide of 1994, 10 to 11% population were involved directly or indirectly. One might extend that 10-11% and could say, well, majority might have support, I do not deny it, it is possible, but other cases majority was not involved. In the Nazi genocide also, the majority of the Germans, they did not have even knowledge that Jews are being killed. Of course, they may have been told something against this Jew or that Jew, but the idea of the entire Holocaust was not known to them. See, but if I look at all the cases, there is a linear theory involved. In case of Nazism, there is a linear theory that the Aryan has to sort of racially take over the Jews and capture the world. So, this is a linear growth of the Aryan race. In case of Rwanda also, there is a linear theory. The Hutu race of Rwanda has to sort of remove the Tutsis and claim. So, this is again a linear theory that was going on. Now, we have talked about big violence. What about the small violence that goes on, not genocide level, but still violence? This is where this is the central discourse takes place. Now, here what I will do, first I have to talk about some false flags. Some things should not be taken into. One is the media report. If you look at the media report, there is a problem. Why? Because I discuss in my book, there is a part of human psychology which is called the dark triad, Machiavellism, narcissism and psychopathy. What does this psychology tell you? It tells you when you want to attack other, you pretend to be a victim and then you attack the other guy. So that not only you attack the other guy, you put the blame also the other guy. So, this is acknowledged in psychology literature and all. I have given examples. I give you one example that everybody will agree here. When the Nazis, they attacked Poland, what did they say? They say, and the BBC also carried that news, the police guards attacked Germans. So, they did a false flag operation. And it was shown in the BBC, the police guards attacked Germany and they are saying, okay, they have attacked, so we are going there. So, they actually pretended victimhood and they are going to thrash the Jews of Poland. I mean, that is what was written in their vehicles. Second is the amount of recorded violence. Does it show again intolerance? Not necessarily. It is possible, there is again psychological literature says, suppose you are attacked, you actually you have a sort of a psychological trait to take revenge and then basically there is anger and that actually burst out. So, just because someone attacked, so other people can attack you fast, but it is possible that in the counter attack, the attacker may suffer more. So, these are not very way. So, one example is exactly, if you look at the pagans and Rome, under Rome, a few Christians were killed in Rome under as martyrs. This was described by Catherine Nixie in her book, the darkening age, the destruction of the classical world. So, basically few Christian martyrs were killed, but when the Christians they took revenge, the entire paganity was sort of was abolished. The entire paganism is abolished from the Roman Empire. So, what I will do? I will use a framework given by a philosopher, Friedrich Hayek. Friedrich Hayek says there is something called a tacit knowledge. What is a tacit knowledge? Tacit knowledge means only people involved know, other people may not know. So, suppose there is a victim and an aggressor, they themselves know who is aggressor, who is victim. Outside people may not know. So, the victim, he will try to save himself. How would he save? He will not speak by words. I mean, he may speak by words, but that is not very important. What will happen is, he will vote by his foot. He will move away from that place. He will migrate out. And so, the population proportion of the victim community will go down. And this is how it will happen, right. So, basically Jews and Nazis, right. If you look at the Nazi propaganda, Germany, Nazis are saying the Jews are the aggressors, they control everything, they are torturing the German people, and the Jews are, of course, will say, well, Nazis are actually torturing us. Now, who is correct? Of course, we know the Jews are correct, because the Jews had to leave Germany, not the vice versa, right. This is how we will do. So, now I will put this framework and see into the data. So, here you can see I have taken all the 4 cases. First case is, so we will decide someone as a victim by the population proportion. So, first case is both the majority and the minority they have an LTSE. Here anything could happen. According to the majoritarian hypothesis, the minority population will decrease. LTSE hypothesis says either can decrease or increase, depends upon the intensity of the LTSE idea. What is the observation? There, I have seen a few cases like Sri Lanka, Myanmar, where these sort of an understanding were there. Sri Lanka, basically the Sri Lankans, Buddhists, they took maybe Western idea of nationalism a little bit too seriously. So, they tried to start a uniform language and all, which is sort of little, it is sort of imperialistic to an extent. The Tamils also are not sort of very, in the Sri Lankan context, they also killed people, innocent people. I mean, not talking about all Tamils, but the LTT, their organization, and though they basically they are also not very sort of accommodative. So, there is a conflict and all, but I do not see anyone sort of have a very can talk things with white face, and you can see there is no really major change in population. Same story happened in Myanmar. And there are second case, nobody has an LTSE like Brazil. Brazil and whites and blacks. America has whites and blacks also. But in America, they are called whites and blacks. In Brazil, nobody is called whites and black. They are called Brazilians. So, there is no intolerance, there is no data. So, this case also does not reveal anything. Third example, the majority has an LTSE, the minority does not. In this case, both the hypothesis will talk, the minority population will decrease. It happens so, like in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, all the places, right. The majority having Islamism, and this is there are so many examples. And minority may not, and this is how it happens. Now, let us flip the scenario. Suppose the majority is without LTSE and the minority is having LTSE. Here the majoritarian hypothesis will say the minority population will decrease, but my hypothesis will say the majority population will decrease. So, there is a conflict between the two inference, and one of them has to be true from the data. And the data actually says, in case of India, Hindus were like 88% in 1947, now they are 78% in the 2011 census. It is anticipated they are even lesser than that now. But of course, that is sort of the common understanding in some sense. But anyway, even by 2011 hypothesis, Hindus have fallen 10%. And is it India's special case? I am just fitting a theory, I am just creating a theory to fit that, not really. There are many other cases like Lebanon. Lebanon, there is the Orthodox Christians who do not have an LTSE, and there is a lot of growing Islamism and Arab nationalism which are LTSEs in Lebanon. And what happened, Lebanon was a Christian majority country, but after the civil war it has become a Christian minority country because they did not have any LTSE. Same stories happened in Nepal, where the LTSE of left communism is sort of making Hindus sort of less and less. Same thing happened with Tibet, where the majority Tibetans are sort of going down in population, and minority Chinese socialism inspired Chinese are sort of rising. Now, this is a here is that I am saying what I am saying is something very novel. Well, I would have liked to say something novel, but I am exactly not altogether novel, because Nassim Nicholas Taleb has said it. The most intolerance wins. The dictator is the stubborn minority. He is not saying dictatorship of the majority is the truth. The truth is dictatorship of the stubborn minority, and he has given his example also. That is what he is talked about. Now, my hypothesis depends on the tacit knowledge. Who knows who are discriminating, who is being intolerant? The intolerant organizations. So, one of them is banned organization Popular Front of India. There is a document seized, and their document they are saying that they are talking about Islamism. They are talking about that we do not need to have a majority. We need to be just a really intolerant, and then we can win India. That is what they are trying to say. So, they are also acknowledging that winning has nothing to do with the numbers, it is all about intolerance. Now, the question is, why the majority of Hindus are called majoritarian and sort of castigated 80%, like I have shown, 80% of the time the global media blames Hindus for all the problems of the world. It is actually not because of the any real issue, because the media is driven by liberalism. Liberalism has an LTSE. That is why they have to encroach upon all the national issues, and that is exactly what is happening here. That is why they are actually blaming the Hindus as majoritarian. So, there are one or two Strawman hypotheses argument is placed. One is called there is a structural violence and that is why the minorities having not minority Muslims in India are not having enough economically prosperous jobs and all. So, this is a quote I am quoting from a book which argues in favor of that hypothesis. Now, definitely jobs require education, skill, discipline, all these sort of things. Now, there is a report again from NCAER that actually tells that Hindus and Muslims, the nominal difference in income is very less, not very high, only 3,000, I mean I have shown the statistics here. But if you look at the other minorities like Sikhs and Christians, they are having a really higher income than either of them. Why? The reason, so basically it is nothing to do with majority or minority, it is all to do with who is investing in skills and jobs. And the same report is saying basically Muslims have higher fertility rate. So, if you have higher children, if you have same money, of course you cannot invest that much money for any children in their education. So, of course in such a case the community will suffer from lack of skills that require informal jobs, and that is what actually what is happening in income. I mean there is a straightforward economic way of looking at it without attributing to any majoritarian hypothesis. There is similar hypothesis again about crimes, again a Strawman hypothesis. They say that Muslims are only 14%, but in the prison they are 19% because people are sort of judiciary are biased against them. Okay, I accept it and take it in face value. Now, let us go to UK where both Hindus and Muslims are minorities. There, if your hypothesis holds, both should be higher than their proportion. But actually if you look at UK, Muslims are like 4.2%, but 18% in prison population. I have given all the sources of course in my book, you can look it up. The Hindu migrants are 1.3%, but they are so low that it does not even come in fraction percent wise. So, basically you can see again there is a difference even to minorities, because not all cultures are same, and this has been acknowledged by a very perceptive British writer Theodore Dalrymple, and I have quoted his book what he has written, and this actually sort of coincides with this understanding. In science there is something called confirmatory test. Let us say whatever I said is wrong, then just assume it, then what do you expect? Suppose the liberals are governing, then intolerance will go down, tolerance will go up, right? This is what I am saying, but this is the exact opposite of it. Now, let us look at the different cases where it is exactly opposite is happening. So, for example, in academics, the Democrat to Republican ratio what 5:1 20 years ago, 15-20 years ago. Now, in 10 years the ratio has become much skewed, like 11 or 12 to 1 for 1 in America, right. So, is it possible that really the Democrats are much smarter, that is why they are there? Well, not really, because if you look at the STEM subjects where basically a hard IQ is required or hard IQ is measured, there you can see the proportions are not less for the liberals, more for the conservatives. So, definitely you cannot really say that liberals are smarter. This is happening because there is no discrimination. So, there are papers I have quoted and here. So, they actually show that essentially what the liberals actually, if you are not a liberal, you are actually discriminated in academia. Even more is that, let us look at a paper, and in this paper you can see that this is a long, there are two aspects of it, one is long term, one is short term. This paper is by Ivy League professors, it is a very famous paper, NBR series, very famous series. There it is actually shown that in the last 40 years or so, the intolerance has risen tremendously in American society. And what is the source? This is the time, late 1970s, when the liberalism has infiltrated academia in a big way, and these theories is being taught in all over the America seriously. There is another survey in 2023 which actually show that last 4-5 years, when the 4 years or 3-4 years, when the liberals were actually ruling America, in the only 3-4 years, there is a very big rise in intolerance in American society. So, what I am saying is wrong, you would have seen exactly other way around. When liberals are governing, either intolerance would have gone down or it would have remained at least same, but we see exactly other way around. Intolerance is rising very fast. That means My theory cannot be really anything crazy theory, but this is sort of what explains the data better. So, now what I will talk about, what is the way to social harmony. So, this is more philosophical. I would sort of request you to go through my book to understand it properly. I will just give you a small summary. Essentially, any social system could come down from two sources. One is theory driven. It is like 10 commandments. Some theories are given, you have to adhere to that. Another is not theory driven, but let us say it is more of practice driven. So, let us say smoking in front of your elder. There is no, nowhere is written you cannot smoke when you are not in front of the elder. But in some cultures it is taught that do not smoke in front of the elders, and people sort of, it is nothing written anywhere, but it is a social norm, people practice and they sort of adhere to it. So, this is called an empirics driven system. So, this is coming from many sources. I have given some references. One is the writings of S. N. Bal Gangadhar, The Heathen in His Blindness, famous book. This summary is given in my book also, is small a, so you can learn it very quickly. Second is The Conflict of Visions by Thomas Sowell, a very learned thinker, a very sort of a serious thinker, very deep thinker, probably one of the very best thinkers of the 20th century, or maybe in the modern times. So, both the cases it has been talked about this idea. Now, this theory driven center, they has to be very centralized, and they sort of has to be sort of very much more focused on changing things. On the other hand, empirics driven systems based on more consensus, decentralized. However, the theory driven thinkings are politically more powerful, because this gives you very easy stories. No, this bad, this good, this bad. Empiric systems are not this good, this bad, it is more nuanced. So, politically it is very weak. So, liberalism is a theory driven system, whereas Indian social system, Indic social system is sort of a empiric driven system. And in the Indian system, we have something called Satta and Ahimsa. This is a value that has been talked about many times. It has been talked about in the Mahabharata times, it has been talked about by the Buddha, Gautam Buddha. It has been talked about, he gave a new nomenclature in call it Pragya and Karuna, but essentially same thing. This has been talked about by long tradition, but ending in Gandhiji. Gandhiji talked about Satta and Ahimsa. This is sort of has to be practiced by all. Now, Ahimsa, there is a sort of a misunderstanding. People think that if the other party is doing violence, retreating is an Ahimsa. No, it is not Ahimsa. Then all the people who are working in police and military, they are all violating Ahimsa, but that is not true in Indian tradition. If you look at the greatest Ahimsa, persons of Ahimsa like Rama, Krishna, Buddha, they are all born in Kshatriya family. Their profession was fighting, still they are called Ahimsa. Why? Because Ahimsa is not physical violence, it is negating the source of the violence. If the source of the violence is inside, you have to negate it through your tapasya, sadhana. If the source of the violence is outside, you have to raise arms to stop that violence. That is what we call Ahimsa. So, Ahimsa is not exactly the physical non-violence, which Gandhiji has sort of, he himself acknowledged, he learnt it from Rousseau and Russian Christianity, but that is not the Indic idea of Ahimsa. Indic idea of Ahimsa is to negate the source of the violence, not the physical violence. So, this is what I sort of end my talk with. I think there is much to learn on that, but I think the talk is centered around negating the majoritarian myth. If the myth is sort of no more, then probably I will get more requests to elaborate on this later part, and then I will sort of talk about more on that. Of course, you can read my book to understand this. And thank you very much all. You can always shoot me questions in social media and elsewhere. I believe in complete freedom of speech, so I will be very happy to answer your questions.